Glass shattered at 3:12 a.m. inside Chicago's most notorious private club. A woman collapsed over the mahogany threshold, clutching a devastating stab wound. She didn't know the territory she had just invaded belonged to Demari Castellano, a man who never left loose ends until he looked into her terrified eyes. Neon lights flickered off the icy puddles lining Randolph Street. Chicago was unforgiving in November, an aggressive chill slicing through the towering high-rises of the West Loop. At this hour, the district was a ghost town, save for the occasional roar of a delivery truck. Inside the Cobalt Room, an unmarked high-end speakeasy, tucked discreetly behind a renovated meatpacking warehouse, the atmosphere was insulated heavy with the scent of aged bourbon and expensive cigar smoke. Demari Castellano sat at the head of a sprawling oak poker table, his dark eyes scanning the financial manifests spread before him. As the undisputed head of the Castellano syndicate, Demari operated in the grey areas of the city's infrastructure. He controlled the ports, the union contracts, and a sprawling underground casino network. He was a man of meticulous order, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that looked pristine even after a 14-hour day. Opposite him sat his underboss Leonardo, nursing a scotch and waiting for Demari's verdict on a disputed shipping route near Navy Pier. Outside, the freezing wind masked the sound of desperate footsteps. Callista O'Donnell was losing her battle against her own body. Her breaths came in ragged, agonizing gasps, pluming into white mist in the frigid air. Her left hand was pressed desperately against her ribs, her fingers slick with a thick, warm wetness that was rapidly staining her beige trench coat a dark crimson. A hunting knife had caught her just beneath the ribcage 10 minutes earlier, courtesy of a masked enforcer in an alley off Halsted Street. She had managed to lose him by darting through a maze of loading docks, but her adrenaline was crashing. Her vision blurred the streetlights, hallowing into blinding streaks of yellow. Tucked securely beneath her right arm, wrapped tightly in a plastic bag to protect it from the elements, was a black leather ledger. It was the only thing keeping her moving. The ledger belonged to Valdemar Long, a ruthless Irish mobster who masqueraded as a legitimate real estate developer. That book contained the exact names, dates, and offshore accounts, proving Long was responsible for the orchestrated murder of Callista's older brother Thomas, an investigative journalist who had gotten too close to the truth. Callista stumbled her boots, scraping violently against the concrete. She needed a sanctuary. She needed to hide before Long's hounds picked up her trail again. Through her fading vision, she spotted the heavy brass-handled oak doors of the Cobalt Room. There were no signs, no bouncers out front at this hour, but a faint, warm light leaked from beneath the threshold. It was a desperate gamble. She threw her weight against the heavy wood, but it was locked tight. Panic set in. She could hear the distinct, heavy thud of footsteps echoing from the alley she had just escaped. They were coming. Spotting a heavy iron trash receptacle near the curb, Callista dragged it toward the establishment's side window, a pane of frosted reinforced glass. With the last ounce of her failing strength, she shoved the iron bin into the glass. The shattering crash was deafening in the dead of the night. Inside the club, Demari didn't flinch, but Leonardo and 3 heavily armed associates instantly drew their suppressed handguns, aiming at the source of the noise. The frosted glass gave way, and a figure tumbled awkwardly through the jagged frame, tearing the heavy velvet curtains down as she fell. Callista hit the hardwood floor with a sickening thud, coughing violently. The trench coat fell open, revealing a terrifying amount of arterial bleeding. She tried to push herself up, her shaking arms failing her, and collapsed onto her side. "Don't move!" Leonardo barked his weapon, trained directly on her head. "Give me one reason not to put a hollow point in your skull." Callista couldn't speak. Her eyes darted wildly, taking in the opulent surroundings, the drawn weapons, and finally the man sitting calmly at the head of the table. Damari Castellano stood up, slowly raising a single hand. The guns in the room lowered slightly, though the tension remained electric. Damari walked around the table, his polished Oxfords making slow, deliberate sounds against the floorboards. He stopped just inches from her trembling form. He looked down, his expression unreadable. To him, she was an anomaly. People did not accidentally break into his sanctuary. "Check the perimeter," Damari ordered in a low, resonant voice. Two of his men immediately vanished toward the broken window, peering out into the freezing night. "Dom, she's bleeding out on the Persian rug," Leonardo muttered, keeping his gun aimed at her chest. "Could be a setup. Long's boys have been probing our borders all week." "She's not one of Long's," Damari said, his sharp eyes catching the subtle details. He noticed her manicured but bruised hands, the sensible but scuffed boots, and the desperate, fiercely protective way she clutched a plastic-wrapped bundle to her chest. "She's running from him." Callista's vision was narrowing into a dark tunnel. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely a rasp. Her grip on the ledger loosened, and the black leather book slid partially out of the plastic. Damari's eyes zeroed in on the ledger. Stamped into the leather was a subtle, embossed Celtic cross intertwined with a serpent Valdemar Long's private seal. Damari's demeanor shifted instantly. The cold, calculating mobster saw an opportunity disguised as a tragedy. Long's private ledger was a ghost, a myth whispered about in the underworld. It was the key to dismantling his biggest rival's financial empire, and this dying woman had somehow walked right through Long's fortified defenses to steal it. "Boss, we got movement down the street. 2 black SUVs just killed their headlights," one of the men called out from the window. "It's Valdemar's cleanup crew." "Leonardo," Damari commanded, his voice slicing through the panic. "Get her downstairs. Now, call Aris. Tell him we need a trauma surgery in the basement. If she dies, I'll hold you personally responsible." "Are you insane?" Leonardo hissed. "If Valdemar finds out we're harboring the thief who ripped him off, it's open war." "It's already war," Damari replied, smoothly, reaching down to pick up the fallen ledger. He looked at Callista, who had completely lost consciousness, her pale face resting against the hardwood. "She just brought us the nuclear codes. Secure the building." As Leonardo hoisted the unconscious woman over his shoulder and rushed her toward the hidden basement stairwell, Damari stood in the center of the room. He brushed a shard of glass off his jacket, his mind already 3 steps ahead in the violent chess match that was about to consume Chicago. Callista woke to the blinding glare of surgical lights and the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic. She gasped a sudden, localized agony flaring in her left side. Her hand shot to her ribs, but she met thick, tightly wound gauze and medical tape instead of an open wound. "I strongly advise against sudden movements, Miss O'Donnell." The voice was calm, deep, and heavily accented. Callista blinked rapidly, her vision clearing to reveal a subterranean room that looked like a cross between a luxury hotel suite and an intensive care unit. Heart monitors hummed quietly in the corner. Sitting in a leather armchair beside the bed was the man from the club, Damari Castellano. He was no longer wearing his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the faint edge of a dark tattoo on his collarbone. "How do you know my name?" Callista demanded, her voice hoarse. She tried to sit up, but failed, the pain pinning her to the mattress. "You had a driver's license in your coat pocket," Damari replied, smoothly crossing his legs. "Callista O'Donnell, 31. Licensed architect at a mid-sized firm in the Loop. No criminal record, no outstanding debts, which makes it utterly fascinating that you managed to infiltrate Valdemar Long's private study, bypass a biometric safe, and steal his operational ledger. Callista's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked around frantically. Where is it? Where is the book? Safe. Damari assured her, his dark eyes studying her intensely. Safer than you are at the moment. Doctor, Cole managed to repair the arterial damage, but you lost nearly 3 pints of blood. You are currently in the sub-basement of a property that does not exist on any city grid. You're Damari Castellano, Callista said, the realization settling over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. She had read about him in Thomas's files. The Castellano family was the old guard of Chicago's Underworld, sworn enemies of the Long Syndicate. She had literally jumped from the frying pan into the fire. You're going to use it against him. I am going to use it to obliterate him. Damari corrected his tone, devoid of malice, but packed with absolute certainty. But we have a slight problem, Callista. The ledger is heavily encrypted. Valdemar didn't write in standard accounting formats. It's a cipher. Numbers mixed with archaic Gaelic script. Callista swallowed hard, forcing herself to maintain eye contact with the mob boss. I know. My brother Thomas figured out the cipher. He was an investigative reporter. He was going to take the ledger to the feds, but Valdemar's men found him first. They staged it as a drunk, driving accident. Her voice cracked a wave of fresh grief, threatening to overwhelm her. I broke into his house during his annual charity gala. I knew the security blind spots because my architectural firm designed the renovations for his estate. Damari leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The predatory grace of his movements made Callista's breath hitch. You took a knife to the ribs, outran professional killers in freezing weather, and smashed through my window just to get revenge for your brother. Justice, Callista corrected sharply. Not revenge. In my world, they are the same thing, Damari murmured. He stood up, towering over her bed. Valdemar knows you took it. He knows you came into my territory. Right now he has half the corrupt police force in Chicago and his entire payroll of hitters searching for you. To him you are a dead woman. Then let me go, Callista said defiantly. Give me the ledger and let me go to the FBI. Damari actually laughed, a dark, low sound that rumbled in his chest. The FBI, half the agents in the local field office, are listed in that ledger taking Long's bribes. If you walk into a federal building, you will accidentally fall down an elevator shaft before you finish the paperwork. No, you are going to stay right here. I am not your prisoner, she spat, pushing through the pain to prop herself up on her elbows. You are my guest, Damari corrected smoothly, and my partner. We share a common goal, Callista. You want Valdemar Long destroyed for what he did to your brother. I want his empire dismantled, so I can absorb his territories. You are the only person who holds the key to translating Thomas's cipher. I have the muscle and the resources to keep you alive. A partnership with a Mafia boss, Callista said bitterly. Thomas would roll over in his grave. Thomas is in a grave because he tried to fight a war with a pen, Damari stated coldly, though not unkindly. I fight wars with bullets, blackmail, and leverage. You give me the translations. I give you Valdemar Long's head on a silver platter. Do we have a deal? Before Callista could answer, a violent tremor shook the foundation of the building. The subterranean room rattled, dust falling from the reinforced ceiling. The heavy steel door to the medical suite swung open, and Leonardo rushed in his face, smeared with drywall dust, and an assault rifle strapped to his chest. "Dom!" Leonardo shouted. "Long's men just drove a rigged delivery truck into the front of the club. The blast took out the whole first floor. We're compromised. They know she's here, and they aren't negotiating." Damari's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened into chips of black ice. He looked back down at Callista, extending a hand toward her. "It seems the time for deliberation is over, Miss O'Donnell. Can you walk, or do I need to carry you?" Callista looked at the offered hand of the city's most dangerous criminal. She could hear the muffled sounds of gunfire echoing through the ceiling above. Valdemar was coming to finish the job. Taking a deep breath that seared her wounded side, she reached out and tightly gripped Demari Castellano's hand. "Carry me," she whispered, "and give me a gun." Sirens wailed in the distance, a chaotic symphony mourning the destruction of the Cobalt Room. Deep underground, however, the world was reduced to the echoing scrape of Demari Castellano's footsteps against damp concrete. He carried Callista O'Donnell with startling ease, navigating the forgotten Prohibition era, smuggling tunnels beneath the West Loop. Callista gritted her teeth, her arms wrapped tightly around his broad shoulders, fighting the agonizing burn in her left side with every jostling movement. They emerged 20 minutes later, in a subterranean parking garage beneath an unassuming corporate plaza. Leonardo was already waiting by a bulletproof, matte black SUV, his face grim. They cordoned off Randolph Street, Leonardo reported, pulling open the rear door. Valdemar deployed a full assault team. It wasn't a warning strike, Dom. He wanted nothing left but ash. "He missed," Demari replied coldly, sliding into the back seat and gently positioning Callista across the leather seats. "Take us to the Highland Park estate. Initiate Protocol 0. No one enters or leaves without my explicit authorization." The drive north was a blur of neon highway lights and the rhythmic hum of tires against the asphalt. Callista drifted in and out of consciousness, tethered to reality only by the firm, grounding weight of Demari's hand resting protectively over hers. Dawn was threatening to break by the time they arrived at the sanctuary, a brutalist glass and steel mansion hidden behind acres of dense private forest overlooking Lake Michigan. The estate was a fortress, disguised as an architectural marvel. Once inside, Demari's private medical staff took over, ensuring Callista's wound was secure before settling her into a sprawling master suite on the second floor. For 3 days, the mansion operated in a state of suspended animation. Outside, Chicago was tearing itself apart. News networks reported heavily on the sudden violent gang war erupting across the city, attributing the warehouse explosions and port skirmishes to unprecedented organized crime disputes. Inside, the war was silent, fought with ink and paper. Callista sat propped up in bed, a cashmere blanket draped over her legs, staring intensely at the open pages of Valdemar Long's ledger. The plastic wrapping had been discarded. Now she was armed with a yellow legal pad and 3 espresso cups. Demari sat across the room at a mahogany desk, managing his empire via encrypted satellite phones. His dark eyes frequently drifting to the woman who had single-handedly upended his carefully structured world. The cipher is based on the Ogham alphabet, but it's shifted using a numerical key tied to the dates of Catholic feast days. Callista explained, her voice steadying as she fell into the familiar analytical rhythm of her architectural mind. Thomas figured out the pattern before he died. Valdemar isn't just running numbers, he's documenting a massive logistical network. Demari ended his call and walked over, leaning against the bedpost. "Show me." Callista handed him the legal pad. It's a master map of corruption. The ledger outlines 3 main vulnerabilities in Long's empire. The Phantom Fleet. Valdemar owns 3 commercial freighters registered under shell corporations in Panama. They dock at the Port of Chicago, bi-weekly, bypassing customs to import untraceable firearms. The Judicial Payroll. Detailed date-stamped records of wire transfers made to 4 sitting Cook County judges and 2 district attorneys, ensuring his enforcers never face trial. The Judas Contact. The most damning revelation. Thomas didn't stumble into Valdemar's men by accident. He was sold out. Callista's voice broke on the final point. She pointed a trembling finger at a specific line she had translated. My brother was working with an FBI contact to build the case, a man named Special Agent Harrison Miller. But Miller is in the ledger. Valdemar paid him $2 million the day before Thomas was killed in that accident. Damari's jaw tightened, a dangerous, predatory stillness settling over him. He looked at the tears brimming in Callista's eyes, refusing to fall out of pure, stubborn defiance. He reached out his knuckles, brushing gently against her cheek, an unusually tender gesture for a man whose hands were stained with a lifetime of violence. Your brother was a brave man, Callista. But he trusted a broken system, Damari said softly. I do not rely on the system. I rely on leverage. What are you going to do? She whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. I am going to use Agent Miller to set a trap. Damari declared, his tone shifting back to the calculating tactician. Valdemar Long thinks he is untouchable because he owns the shadows. We are going to drag him into the light. The tension in the room morphed into something entirely different. The adrenaline, the shared danger, and the raw vulnerability of their forced proximity had forged an undeniable connection between them. Callista looked up at Damari, seeing past the tailored suits and the terrifying reputation. She saw a protector, a man willing to burn down the city to shield her from the flames. Damari slowly leaned down, his gaze dropping to her lips. The kiss was inevitable, born of fire and survival. It was a desperate, bruising collision that tasted of dark coffee and undeniable promise. When he finally pulled away, his eyes burned with a fierce, possessive intensity. Rest, Callista, he murmured, his thumb tracing her lower lip. Tonight the Long Syndicate ceases to exist. The freezing winds whipping off Lake Michigan were merciless that evening. Navy Pier, usually a bustling hub of tourists and families, was eerily deserted near the abandoned eastern loading docks. The industrial lighting cast long, jagged shadows across the rusted shipping containers. Valdemar Long stepped out of a silver-armored Mercedes, flanked by 6 heavily armed enforcers. He was a towering, broad-shouldered man with a neatly trimmed silver beard and an arrogant sneer permanently etched onto his face. He checked his gold Rolex, impatience rolling off him in waves. Miller better not be playing games, Valdemar growled, adjusting the collar of his cashmere overcoat. If that Castellano rat isn't here, I'll bury the agent alongside him. Earlier that day, Special Agent Harrison Miller had desperately contacted Valdemar, claiming he had located Damari Castellano's vulnerable safe house. Miller promised to deliver Damari in exchange for an immediate extraction and a doubling of his usual bribe. Valdemar, blinded by his hatred for the Castellano family and desperate to retrieve his stolen ledger, had taken the bait. A lone figure stepped out from the shadows of a towering crane. It wasn't Agent Miller. Damari Castellano walked forward, his hands casually resting in the pockets of his dark wool coat. He was entirely alone, unarmed, and radiating a terrifying aura of absolute calm. Valdemar! Damari called out, his voice carrying easily over the sound of the crashing waves. You're looking a little desperate. I hear you lost a book. Valdemar's enforcers instantly raised their assault rifles, the red laser sights painting Damari's chest. Valdemar held up a gloved hand, signaling them to hold their fire. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Damari, I always knew your arrogance would dig your grave. Valdemar sneered, stepping forward. Where is the girl? Hand over the O'Donnell architect and my property, and I might let you keep your casinos on the south side. You misunderstand the dynamics of this meeting, Damari replied smoothly. He pulled a sleek black smartphone from his pocket. I didn't come to negotiate. I came to inform you of your retirement. Damari tapped the screen once. High above, nestled in the sniper nests of the surrounding warehouse rooftops, blinding industrial floodlights suddenly snapped on, bathing the entire dock in blinding white light. Valdemar and his men shielded their eyes, temporarily blinded. Before they could adjust, the piercing wail of police sirens flooded the pier. But these were not the corrupt local cops on Valdemar's payroll. These were heavily armored federal tactical vehicles, bearing the insignia of the FBI's Anti-Corruption Task Force from the Washington, D.C. headquarters. Damari had sent the fully translated ledger, along with offshore banking passwords, and the confession of a terrified Agent Harrison Miller, directly to the federal director in D.C., entirely bypassing the compromised Chicago field office. You called the feds. Valdemar spat his face, twisting in absolute fury. He grabbed an automatic pistol from his waistband, aiming wildly at Damari. You broke the code. You're a dead man. The code applies to men of honor, Damari said coldly, not moving an inch as federal agents swarmed the docks, their weapons drawn. You murder journalists and hide behind badges. You're just a parasite. And I just eradicated you. Gunfire erupted as two of Valdemar's loyalists foolishly tried to shoot their way out of the federal blockade. They were neutralized in seconds. Seeing the insurmountable odds, the rest of the enforcers dropped their weapons, raising their hands in surrender. Valdemar stood frozen, the pistol trembling in his grip. He looked at Damari, realizing the magnitude of his defeat. He hadn't just been outgunned. He had been entirely outplayed. Drop the weapon long, a tactical commander roared through a megaphone. Slowly, bitterly, Valdemar let the gun fall to the concrete. As the federal agents tackled the Irish mob boss to the ground, securing him in heavy steel cuffs, Damari turned his back on the scene, melting seamlessly back into the shadows from which he came. 3 months later, the Chicago skyline glittered under a crisp, clear spring night. The power vacuum left by Valdemar Long's federal indictment had been swiftly and ruthlessly filled by the Castellano syndicate. The city's underworld had found a new, undisputed king. But the king had found something far more valuable. Callista stood on the expansive balcony of Damari's newly renovated penthouse, overlooking the glittering expanse of the magnificent mile. The scar on her side was a faded silver reminder of the night she had declared war on the Mafia, but her posture was strong, her spirit unbroken. The heavy glass door slid open, and Damari stepped onto the terrace. He wrapped his arms around her waist, from behind, pulling her back against his chest. Callista leaned into his warmth, resting her hands over his. The federal prosecutor just announced they are seeking life without parole for Valdemar, Callista said, softly, looking out at the city. Thomas finally got his justice. And what about you? Damari murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Did you get what you wanted? Callista turned in his embrace, looking up into the dark, protective eyes of the man who ruled the city's shadows. She reached up her fingers, threading through his dark hair. She had broken into his world bleeding and desperate, seeking a shield. Instead, she had found an anchor. I got exactly what I needed. She smiled, pulling him down for a kiss. The city of Chicago churned below them, a world of beautiful, dangerous chaos. But high above the streets, the architect and the Mafia boss stood together, ready to build an empire of their own. If you loved this thrilling Mafia romance filled with heart-pounding suspense, dangerous secrets, and a fierce love that conquers all, hit that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your fellow romance drama lovers who crave intense twists and protective heroes. We drop epic high-stakes stories every single week. Subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on the action. Let us know your favorite moment in the comments.